I've been hiking for most of my adult life. It started as something small, just little weekend walks on dirt trails near my apartment when I lived outside Denver. Nothing serious, just a way to stretch my legs and feel like I was part of the real world instead of glued to a screen or hunched over a desk. But like most things that stick, it grew. Over the years, the hikes got longer, the packs heavier, the maps more vague, and the trails less traveled. I never really aimed to be some backcountry expert or whatever label people throw around. I just liked the feeling of being deep in the woods. I liked how the air changed the farther you got from the road. How the trees stopped looking like decoration and started feeling like walls closing in on something older and untouched. It's not something you get walking in the city. It's not even something you get on popular trails. You have to go a little further, just past the last cairn, past the cleared campsites. That's where the woods start to feel real. That's what led me to a place I hadn't been before, Southern Oregon. I'd been through parts of it before, driving or passing through on the edge of a work trip, but I'd never stopped to hike. That changed after a friend of mine moved to Medford. He told me about this area on the edge of a national forest that wasn't really managed like a park. No ranger station, no visitor center, barely even a trailhead. Just a gravel pullout on a Forest Service road, a faded sign with a bunch of shotgun holes in it, and a few worn tracks leading into the trees. That's exactly my kind of place. So I planned a solo trip, 3 days out, 2 nights. Nothing crazy, just enough to really disappear for a bit. I packed lean but careful. Lightweight tent, down bag, water purifier, bear canister, dry food, my stove, and a Glock 20 I always carry in lion or bear country. Again, I don't carry it because I want to use it. I carry it because things go wrong in the woods in ways you don't always get a second chance to fix. I parked at the pullout mid-morning. There was one other truck there, but it was empty, dusty, looked like it had been sitting a while. Probably a hunter or a long-distance hiker off-trail. I didn't give it much thought. I locked up, slung my pack, and started walking. The trail was barely marked. A faint path through ferns and leaf litter that twisted gently into thicker forest. After about 2 miles, it widened out and followed a narrow ridgeline that dropped off steeply on both sides. The kind of spot where every step feels like a tightrope, even if it's only a few feet wide. The views were good up there. Long stretches of pine forest, distant hills rolling in every direction like waves. But what I really liked was the silence. No traffic, no aircraft overhead. Just birds, wind, and sometimes the groan of old trees swaying against each other. The deeper I got, the more I noticed how untouched it felt. No wrappers, no footprints, no signs anyone had been out there in a long time. Just pure wild. I hiked about 10 miles the first day, cutting west off the main ridge trail and following a dry wash until I found a flat spot near a bend in a seasonal creek. It was mostly dry, just a trickle of water moving across smooth rocks, but it was enough to filter for drinking. I set up camp there, boiled some water, ate a pouch of rice and beans, and sat on a boulder until the sun dipped below the trees. Night came fast and cold, like it always does in the woods. I zipped into my bag early and drifted off listening to the wind scrape across the branches above me. No weird feelings, no strange sounds. Just a clean, quiet night in the backcountry. The second day started like any other hike. Slow stretches of trail broken up by short climbs, with the air warming up as the sun got higher. I had a vague loop planned, something that would bring me back to the main ridgeline by evening. Most of the morning was uneventful. I saw some deer tracks, a few turkey scratches in the leaves, even heard an owl still calling from a dense cedar grove after the sun was fully up. Normal stuff. It wasn't until I came around a narrow switchback about 3 miles past camp that things got strange. I was moving slowly, like I always do when I'm in dense forest. Deliberate steps, eyes ahead and to the side, ears open. The trail dipped through a patch of young pines and curved sharply to the left. As I rounded the bend, I saw it. At first, I didn't register what I was looking at. It was just color and shape. Tan, gray, and deep red all mixed together in a heap near a fallen log about 15 yards off the trail. Then my brain caught up. It was a deer, dead, fresh, laid on its side with its neck at an angle that wasn't natural. Blood pooled beneath it, soaking the pine needles. The stomach had been opened, ribs cracked wide. Parts of it were missing, chunks of meat stripped clean from its flanks. Steam was still rising off the carcass in the morning air, and crouched beside it, low, still, and silent, was a mountain lion. I don't know how I didn't see it first. Maybe it was the way the light came through the trees, or how perfectly it blended into the ground. But the moment my eyes hit it, everything in my body froze. It wasn't looking at me. It was focused on the deer, paws braced, shoulders hunched forward. I must have caught it mid-feed. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My heart slammed once, twice, then settled into that tight, humming thump that only fear can bring out of you. I stared at the cat, waiting for it to react, waiting for it to notice me. Then it did. Its head snapped up. Its eyes locked onto mine instantly. No hesitation, no confusion, just full, alert attention. I felt my lungs stop. My knees wobbled a little under the weight of adrenaline. I thought about reaching for the pistol, but I didn't move. We stared at each other for maybe 3 seconds. Then, without a sound, no growl, no grunt, not even the snap of a twig, the mountain lion turned and ran. It didn't bolt in the way you'd expect. No flailing, no thrashing. It moved like a shadow sliding across the forest floor. Smooth, fluid. It turned away from the carcass, bounded once over a downed tree, and was gone. Just like that. The whole thing felt like watching a video with the sound turned off. I'd never seen anything move so fast, so big, and so quietly. It was like watching a movie on mute, something your brain can't fully accept as real. I stood there a while after it disappeared, still not breathing right. My body felt like it had gone hollow, like I was floating above myself. The deer was still there, blood soaking into the ground, steam still curling off its side. It looked like something out of a nature documentary, except I was standing in it. I backed away slowly, eyes scanning the trees. I knew the cat had probably run far off. That's what they do when spooked. But I also knew cats don't always leave forever. They double back. They wait. They watch. I didn't want to be watched. I turned and hiked back the way I came, fast but not frantic. Every 10 steps I looked behind me. Every shadow looked wrong. Every snapped twig felt like a signal. The hike back to camp felt longer than it should have. I kept listening for movement in the brush, kept expecting to see that tan shape again. I didn't. When I got back to camp, I packed up everything. I hadn't planned to hike all the way out that day, but I didn't feel like staying another night. The idea of sleeping out there with a fresh kill less than 3 miles away didn't sit right with me. That lion had worked hard for that deer. It would come back for it. I didn't want to be anywhere near that place when it did. I hiked until my legs burned, got back to the trailhead around dusk. My truck was still the only one there. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat for a few minutes. Let my heart settle. Tried to process what happened. I've thought about that day a lot since then. People think the scariest part of the woods is getting lost or falling or running into a bear. But those things are loud. They happen fast. You know when they start and you know when they end. What scared me wasn't that the mountain lion was there. It was how quiet it was, how close it let me get, how completely it vanished. That silence, that total, absolute silence, has stayed with me more than anything else. It reminded me that I'm not at the top of the food chain out there. Not even close. The woods don't care how much gear you have or how many hikes you've done or how calm you think you are. They belong to something else. Something older, something quieter. And if that lion had wanted to hurt me, I wouldn't have even seen it coming. I wouldn't have heard a thing. I still hike, still go deep, still solo sometimes. But I watch more carefully now. I read the ground. I notice the birds. And I never forget that what's quiet isn't always gone. Sometimes it's just waiting. I was 17 the first time I saw something that really stuck with me in the woods. I mean, the kind of thing that stays in your mind whether you want it to or not. Some things just leave an imprint like that. It was late September in northeast Pennsylvania, near where my cousin and I used to hike every weekend back when we still had that kind of time and no real responsibilities. We'd been going to this patch of forest off and on for over a year, mostly because it wasn't well known and didn't have many other people around. The trails weren't official or anything. Most of them were old logging roads or deer paths that sort of crisscrossed through the ridges and down into the hollows. We liked the feeling of being out there alone. That whole stretch felt untouched, even though we knew it wasn't. It gave you the sense that anything could be around the next corner. We parked at the end of a gravel pull-off and followed the same familiar loop we'd done half a dozen times. The early fall air was crisp, not cold yet, but enough that you wanted a jacket in the shade. Dry leaves cracked under every step. The trees were just starting to turn, yellows, some red, lots of brown. The sun filtered in through all that thinning canopy, making the forest glow at weird angles. We were maybe 2 miles in when we decided to go off the trail a bit, just to see where one of the narrower paths led. We'd seen it before but never followed it. It cut off to the left through thicker brush and headed toward a ridgeline we'd only ever looked at from a distance. At first, it felt like any other section. Damp earth, occasional fresh deer scat, lots of small squirrel nests up in the pines, but after about 10 or 15 minutes of walking, things felt different. I don't mean in a way that jumps out at you immediately. It was subtle. The ground got softer. The air smelled different, like old water and something faintly metallic. There were fewer birds all of a sudden, fewer sounds in general. I didn't say anything out loud, but I noticed. We kept walking though, maybe another 100 yards. Then we reached the base of a low cliff, maybe 30 feet tall at most. It wasn't a sharp drop or anything like that. More like a steep rock face with trees growing thick at the top and bottom. One tree, a big, thick hemlock, had roots that clung to the side like it was hanging on for dear life. Right at the base, tucked in a slight curve of the rock, there was this dark, open area. It wasn't a cave exactly, more like a small overhang or shallow depression. And that's where we saw it. At first, I thought it was just brush or leaves piled up weird, but the closer we got, the more wrong it looked. It wasn't leaves. It was a mound, pile really, for bones, legs, dozens of deer legs. Some looked fresh. Some were old and dark with dried blood, the joints stiff and angled unnaturally. There were hooves sticking out in all directions, entrails, torn fur, pieces of rib cage. Some parts were clean like they'd been stripped by something with precision, and others were a mess, like they'd been chewed or clawed apart. The smell hit me next. I remember gagging and having to step back. It was that thick rot smell, but also the sharp, iron stench of fresh blood. Not all of it was old. There were flies buzzing in clouds, their sound loud and constant. Something about the way it was all arranged made my stomach twist. This wasn't some animal drag-out. This wasn't a place where a predator had taken its kill to eat in peace. It was too neat, too intentional. Legs laid out, entrails gathered, piled. We stood there for a minute or two, frozen, trying to make sense of it. My brain was scrambling for an explanation. Poachers maybe, or someone gutting deer up here and dumping the waste. But why just the legs and organs? Where were the heads? Where were the torsos? I kept looking around like I expected someone to pop out from the trees. There were no boot prints, no tire tracks. Just that mess tucked into the rock. My cousin, who was usually the more curious one, looked pale. He didn't say anything, but he turned and started walking back. I followed without a word. I just didn't want to be near it anymore. It felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. We didn't run, but we didn't take our time either. The path back felt longer, and the silence felt heavier. Every twig snap made me tense. At one point, I thought I heard something behind us, a low rustling maybe 50 feet back. But when I looked, there was nothing. Could have been a squirrel. Could have been anything. But my nerves were up now, and I wasn't thinking straight. When we finally made it back to the car, we both sat for a while, just trying to calm down. The woods didn't feel the same after that, like they'd changed on us. Or maybe we were just seeing them for what they really were. That night, I told my parents. I described everything, from the path we took to what we saw at the cliff. They listened, sort of, but I could tell they weren't really hearing me. They brushed it off like we'd stumbled onto a hunter's dump site. My dad even laughed a little, saying we were probably just being dramatic. letting our imaginations get the best of us. He said the smell and gore made us panic, that it wasn't anything strange. Maybe a bear, maybe a sick animal dragging things back there. I stopped trying to explain after that. My cousin and I didn't really talk about it either. I think we both wanted to forget it. But a few days later, I started looking into it on my own. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. I searched through hunting forums, poaching reports, local news archives. I couldn't find anything about that spot specifically, but I came across a few mentions of people finding similar piles in that general region. Not exact locations, but close. People would find deer parts, always legs, guts, sometimes hides, left in odd places. One guy said he found a dozen legs all standing upright in the ground, like they'd been planted. Another post described an offering-looking pile under a fallen pine somewhere near the Pocono line. Most of the replies just laughed or blamed it on predators, but a few said they'd seen similar things and didn't buy the easy explanations. I even called the local game commission hotline, anonymously. I told them what we found, just the basics. The guy on the phone said it was likely coyotes or bears, that they'd sometimes drag parts to dens. He told me it was normal woodland activity. I hung up and didn't bother trying again. It didn't feel normal, though. Not with how clean some parts were. Not with the way they were stacked. I'd seen what coyotes do to deer. This wasn't that. I never went back to that part of the woods. Not even close. For months, I'd think about it when I closed my eyes. Sometimes I'd smell it again. That heavy rot smell would just come back to me like it was in the room. I've seen a lot of stuff in nature. Dead things, kill sites, even a bear once, up close, farther north. But nothing like that mound. Nothing that felt so deliberate. The worst part is not knowing who or what did it. I still think about that sometimes when I'm out hiking, even on marked trails. I don't go off-path anymore. I don't explore the cool places like we used to. That feeling of discovery we chased. It's not something I want anymore. Because sometimes you don't want to find what's waiting out there. Sometimes you're better off not knowing. And sometimes, even if you tell someone, they won't believe you anyway. So now I just keep it to myself. But I still think about those legs, that pile, that silence, and I still wonder who or what put it there. It was the fall after I graduated high school when I decided to take a long hike alone in northern Pennsylvania. I had a few weeks before I started my new job at a small mechanic shop, and I wanted to spend some time outdoors to clear my head. I always loved the woods. Grew up hunting and fishing with my uncle since I was old enough to carry my own gear. Being outside gave me peace, especially in the cooler months. The bugs weren't bad, the leaves were turning, and most people had packed up their summer hiking plans by then. That's the way I liked it, just me, the woods, and nothing else. The area I picked was familiar but not completely mapped out. It was part of a big stretch of public forest that wasn't too far from the New York border. I'd been there a few times with friends for weekend hikes, but this time I planned to go deeper and camp for a few nights. I packed light but smart, just enough food, water purifier, tent, fire tools, first aid, and a .22 pistol I always brought when I was alone. Not that I expected trouble, but I liked the comfort of having it. I parked at a known pull-off just after sunrise and headed in along a fire road I'd seen before. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you hear every step you take. The trees were thinning out their leaves already, and you could smell that earthy, wet mulch smell in the air. The kind that reminds you the forest is always changing, always rotting and growing at the same time. I took my time moving in deeper, stopping every now and then to look at prints in the dirt or scat on the trail. I saw some old turkey tracks, a few fresh deer trails cutting across the slope, and what I thought might have been bear sign, but it was hard to tell. I've always liked paying attention to that stuff. Little signs of life most people walk right past. I hiked most of the morning, maybe 6 or 7 miles in, when I found a solid spot to set up camp. It was near a bend in a slow-moving creek, up on a dry patch just above the waterline. The canopy was tight enough to give me cover, and there were no widowmakers above. I set my tent, gathered dry kindling, and started a small fire just to warm some lunch and boil creek water. Everything was peaceful, almost too peaceful. I was glad for the quiet at first. No other hikers, no planes overhead, no roads nearby. Just wind, leaves, and water. After eating, I went for a walk upriver. I wanted to explore, maybe see where the creek came from. About a mile up, I found an old footbridge, just some planks laid over rocks. It looked like it had been there a while, maybe made by a hunter or trapper years ago. On the far side, I noticed something strange. The brush was thick, but there was a sort of path running through it. Not natural like a game trail. It looked walked, flattened in a straight line. I followed it. Maybe a quarter mile in, I started seeing trash. Not much at first. A torn corner of a plastic wrapper, then a crushed beer can, then a broken piece of a cooler lid, all tucked into the brush like someone had tried to hide it. It made my stomach turn a little. I hate seeing garbage in places that should be wild. But then it got worse. I came up on a clearing, rough and uneven, maybe 50 feet wide. In the middle was an old camp. Not recent. The fire pit was full of ashes soaked from rain, and the logs around it were rotting out. What made me stop were the bones. Scattered, bleached, piles of them. At first I thought maybe someone had butchered deer here, maybe a group of hunters using it as a base. But it wasn't like that. These bones weren't cleanly cut. Some were smashed. Some still had fur clinging to them. I could make out ribs, leg bones, joints. Skulls too, but only partial. They weren't laid out in any organized way. They were thrown, dumped, left to rot. I counted at least 5 different piles. I stood still and listened. Nothing. But something in me started feeling off. My heart wasn't pounding yet, but I felt that tightness in my chest, that feeling that I'd walked into something I wasn't supposed to see. I walked slowly around the clearing. On the far edge, I found something even worse. 2 deer, recent kills. They'd been strung up between trees using thick cable, gutted but not skinned. The organs were missing, and the meat was mostly hacked off in large, ugly chunks. Not butchered, just hacked. It looked rushed, messy. Next to them were 2 plastic tubs. One of them was full of bloody hides. The other had pieces of raw meat still in it, covered in flies. The stench was unbearable. I gagged and backed off. Then I saw something else. Nailed to a tree just above eye level was a game camera. One of those cheap trail cams you strap to a tree. Except this one was wired to a battery box and covered in mud to blend in. It was pointed directly at the hanging deer. I stood frozen, staring at it. My first thought was to rip it down. My second was to run. But I didn't move. My brain was spinning. Who the hell was doing this out here? This wasn't just hunting. This wasn't field dressing. This was something else. I turned and left fast. Not a run, but close. I retraced my steps exactly, eyes scanning every tree. I kept thinking I'd hear someone behind me or catch sight of a person through the branches. But I didn't. Still, I didn't feel safe. When I made it back to camp, I packed everything in under 5 minutes. Tent, food, gear, all shoved into my pack. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just left. I took a longer way out to avoid walking back past that footbridge. It added another 2 or 3 miles, but I didn't care. I needed out of those woods. By the time I got back to my truck, it was dark. I didn't stop to change or clean up. I drove straight out of the lot and didn't even look back. I made it home just after midnight. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about what I saw. Who would do that? Why would they leave it like that? It didn't feel like poaching. It felt like something sicker. There was no effort to hide it. No reason for it. Just waste and cruelty. The kind of thing you only hear about in stories you hope aren't true. The next day, I called the local game warden office. I didn't give my name at first. I just told them where I'd been and what I saw. The guy I spoke to took me seriously, which I didn't expect. He asked questions, specific ones. I gave him the rough location, and he said someone would check it out. That was the last I heard. I called back a few weeks later, but they wouldn't tell me anything. Said the report was under investigation. That's all. I never found out what happened. I never found out who did it or if they were caught. But I think about it every time I go hiking now. Every time I step off the path. I think about that camera, that stench, those hacked up deer left to rot. and I think about how easy it is to do something terrible in a place no one else goes. How the woods can hide things. How people can use nature as a shield for things no decent person would ever understand. I haven't gone back to that forest since. I still hike, still fish, still hunt. But I stay closer to marked trails now. Closer to places where someone might hear you yell if you had to. Because the truth is, people are the scariest thing in the woods. Not bears, not cougars, people. And after what I saw that day, I believe that more than ever. I've always liked being out in the woods alone. It gives me this calm feeling I can't really find anywhere else. There's something about moving at your own pace with no traffic noise, no phones buzzing, and no one talking. Just your steps, your breathing, and whatever sounds the woods decide to give you that day. I don't hike to post pictures or clock mileage. I hike because being out there makes me feel clear-headed. That's how I ended up about 8 miles deep in the backcountry of a state park out west. I'm not going to name it because I'm not looking for attention, and I don't want to make it seem like the area's unsafe. It's not. What happened to me could have happened almost anywhere wild. It just happened to be there. It was early October, and the weather was perfect. Cold at night, warm during the day, dry enough that everything crackled when you stepped on it. I had taken a week off from work, my first real break in almost 2 years. I packed light but prepared. A good pack, trail food, a jet boil for hot meals, my water purifier, and a Glock 20 I carried anytime I was deep into big predator country. Not that I thought I'd need it, just felt better having it. I'd been hiking in about 2 days at that point, solo, mostly following ridgelines and old game trails that cut through long stretches of pine. The area wasn't super trafficked. The trailhead had maybe 1 or 2 other vehicles when I parked. I hadn't seen a soul since I started moving. It was exactly what I wanted. On the second evening, I camped near a dry wash, just above a steep slope that dropped into dense forest. I remember thinking how quiet everything felt. Even for wilderness, it was quiet. I'd hardly seen any wildlife all day. No deer, no rabbits, not even birds except for some crows far off in the distance. I chalked it up to seasonal shifts, maybe even a storm pushing animals lower, but in hindsight, that silence should have said something to me. That night, I barely slept. Not from fear or anything, just couldn't get comfortable. I kept hearing little sounds just beyond the edges of my tent. Twigs snapping, a rustle here or there. I figured it was probably squirrels or maybe even deer moving in the dark. I'd had stuff walk past my tent before, even sniff it, and I always stayed calm. You learn to ignore most night sounds when you sleep outdoors. If you didn't, you'd lose your mind. The next morning, I started early. I wanted to make a loop back toward a different trailhead that would take me past a higher ridge I'd heard had great views. The climb was slow, and the trail barely existed. Just a faint depression in the ground and a few stacked rocks every now and then. The brush got thick in spots. I pushed through it in places, which meant I made noise. A lot of it. I liked that. I wanted anything nearby to know I was coming. I didn't want surprises. About an hour into that hike, I crested a small slope and stopped to catch my breath. I was drenched in sweat even though the air was cool. I set my pack down against a boulder, took a long drink from my bottle, and just stood there. That's when I felt it. This weird stillness in the air. Not just silence, stillness. No wind, no birds, no bugs. Like the forest was holding its breath. I turned around slowly, scanning the slope below me. That's when I saw it. A mountain lion. About 30 yards down the trail, half hidden behind a thick cluster of young pine. It wasn't crouched. It wasn't charging. It was just there, still, watching. I froze. My first instinct was to grab for my gun, but I didn't move. I didn't want to startle it or trigger anything. The lion didn't move either. It just stared. I could see its shoulders, its head slightly tilted. Its ears were up, not laid back. Not aggressive, just alert. We stood like that for what felt like forever, just staring at each other. I could feel my heart pounding through my shirt. My legs went cold. My mouth dried up instantly. I wasn't breathing properly. Every instinct in my body told me this wasn't good. Not because it was about to leap, but because it wasn't running away. I've seen wild animals run from people their whole lives. That's what they do. That's what's normal. But this cat didn't. It just stood there like it was trying to figure me out. The fear came in waves. It wasn't like a movie where you scream and run. It was deep and silent and heavy. I couldn't move at first. I couldn't even think clearly. The longer it stared, the more I felt like prey. I was a 6-foot, 200-pound adult with a weapon, and I still felt completely outmatched. I finally, slowly, backed toward the boulder. I didn't take my eyes off it. My hand found the Glock and pulled it from the holster. I didn't raise it, didn't point it, just held it low and tight. I didn't want to provoke it, but I wanted to be ready. If it pounced, I knew I'd have one shot, maybe two, but it didn't pounce. I stepped forward. One slow, smooth step. That movement sent a jolt through my chest. I felt a twitch run through my legs, and my bladder gave out a little. Not all the way, but enough to humiliate me. My body was reacting without permission. The cat kept its eyes locked on me, still not crouching, still not showing its teeth. Just curious. I kept still. The gun in my hand was shaking now, and I remember thinking how dumb it was that I'd ever felt safe with it. Even if I fired, even if I hit it, would it stop in time? Would I have the calm to aim? Then, just like that, the cat stopped. It stared for another few seconds, then slowly turned its head. Its eyes moved across the slope, then back to me. I thought for sure it was going to circle or charge, but instead, it blinked, lowered its head slightly, and stepped off the trail into the thick woods. Gone. No sound, no rustle, just vanished. I didn't move right away. I just stood there with my heart still racing, my hands damp and shaking. My knees were soft. I felt like I could collapse at any second. I tried to listen for it, tried to hear if it was circling around, but there was nothing. After a minute or so, I picked up my pack and turned around. I didn't care about the loop anymore. I just wanted out. I didn't run, but I walked fast. I checked behind me every few seconds. Every shadow looked like a shape. Every tree looked like it was watching. It took me 5 hours to get back to the car. I didn't stop once. Not to eat, not to drink, not even to piss, which didn't matter much because I'd already taken care of that. I never saw the cat again. Not once, but I felt it, like it had stamped itself onto my nerves. I felt like I was being followed the whole way out, even though I knew, logically, it was gone. I didn't sleep well that night. Every noise outside my house made me jump. Every flicker of movement at the edge of my vision set my heart racing again. That lasted a few weeks, faded slowly, but it left something in me, a new awareness, a new layer of respect. I've been in the woods since. I still hike. I still go out alone, but I move differently now. I scan more often. I listen harder. I carry bear spray in addition to the gun, and I make sure people know where I'm going. That encounter didn't ruin hiking for me, but it changed it. It reminded me that I'm not the top of the food chain out there. No matter how tough I think I am, no matter how prepared, that lion wasn't hunting me. I know that. It was curious, maybe young, maybe just crossing paths by accident. But it came close enough to decide. Close enough to make me feel what it's like to not be in control. And that's something I'll never forget. I was lucky. Nothing happened. But when you're standing face to face with something that can end you without effort, and it chooses not to, that stays with you. That haunts you more than if it had been a clean, aggressive threat. Because then, at least, the fear would have had rules. Instead, I was left with silence, and a pair of yellow eyes that stared at me like I was some strange thing it didn't quite know how to feel about. And then it was gone. No sound, no sign, just gone. I've always been someone who finds comfort in isolation. It's not that I don't like people. I just like being alone better. Hiking became something I turned to after my late 20s, when I realized the stillness of the woods was one of the few things that let my thoughts settle. I didn't hike for the exercise or the challenge. I hiked because walking through untouched land with nothing but the sound of my own steps felt like I was part of something older than anything else. That kind of peace is hard to come by now. It was late October when I took a solo trip into the backcountry of Northern California. somewhere west of the Sierra foothills. The area I picked wasn't part of any popular trail system. A friend of mine, also a loner type, had told me about this place months back. He said it had almost no foot traffic and no cell signal, which is exactly what I wanted. The elevation wasn't too extreme, and the weather was stable enough for a few nights out there. I planned a 3-day loop, nothing too ambitious, just deep enough to feel far away. I packed carefully. Layers for the cold nights, food for 4 days, water filter, sleeping gear, GPS with backup batteries, a fire kit, and my sidearm. I didn't always carry it, but in lion country, it felt like a smart move. Not that I expected anything to go wrong. I never do. But there's something in the back of my mind that always nags a little when I'm headed into real wilderness alone. People always say the woods are safe, and they mostly are, but that doesn't mean they're harmless. I started the hike early in the morning, just after sunrise. The air was sharp but not freezing. I parked at a faded pull-off on the side of a gravel road that had tire ruts so deep I scraped my undercarriage trying to get out of them. I locked up the truck, strapped on my pack, and started walking up the old fire road that marked the beginning of the route. The trees were already shedding, and the trail was covered in dry brown and yellow leaves that crackled underfoot. I made sure to keep my steps steady and my pace slow. No rush, no timeline, just me and the woods. The first day went exactly how I wanted it to. Peaceful, clear skies, lots of switchbacks leading up to a small ridge. The views opened up every so often, letting me look out over the forest that stretched for miles. I saw deer twice and a few birds high up in the pines, but not much else. No signs of other hikers. No old fire pits or wrappers or boot prints. It was clean land. That was rare, and I appreciated it. I camped that night near a slow-moving creek in a basin surrounded by steep inclines. I found a flat patch of ground near a cluster of mossy rocks and set up my tent just before dark. I boiled water, ate some freeze-dried pasta, and sat by a small fire until the cold started pressing in. Everything around me was quiet except for the water and the wind shifting through the trees. When I laid down in the tent, I felt safe, tired, clear-minded. I slept harder than I had in weeks. The second day was where things started to change. I was following an old game trail that cut diagonally along the side of a hill. It wasn't marked on any map. My friend had told me about it and said it would shave a few miles off the loop. Started fine, just narrow and overgrown. I had to duck under some low branches and push through brush in a few places. But the more I moved through it, the more I noticed something was off. It started with silence. Not the peaceful kind from the first day. This was different. It was heavy. I realized, about halfway through the morning, that I hadn't heard a single bird. Not a crow, not a chirp, just wind and leaves and my own breath. Then I saw the scat. Big pile, fresh, no white in it. Not from a dog or a coyote. Cat, big cat. I could tell by the shape and the way it had been left right in the middle of the trail. I stopped and stared at it for a while, trying to figure out how fresh it was. I'd been moving slow, and it hadn't been there when I passed that same area an hour earlier. That meant it was fresh, really fresh. I felt something change in me at that point, like a door opened in my chest. That alertness you can't fake or force. Comes naturally when something in you knows you're not alone anymore. I kept going, slowly, eyes up, ears open. I knew enough about mountain lions to understand the basics. If you see one, it's probably not going to attack. It's when you don't see it, that's when you should be worried. They're ambush predators, silent, patient. If one's planning to jump you, it doesn't stand in the open. But that's the thing. Knowing that doesn't help you when the woods feel like they're closing in on you. It doesn't help when you start seeing every tree as a shadow, every broken branch as a sign. The trail narrowed even more as it dipped into a steep, shaded gully. The canopy got tighter, and the ground was soft with damp needles. My boots barely made noise now. That's when I saw the track. Just one. A single paw print in the mud, bigger than my hand, clear as day. Front left paw sunken in deep. My throat went dry. I crouched down and stared at it, not really processing what I was seeing for a second. Then I stood up and backed away from it slowly. I didn't want to walk past it, but I didn't want to turn around either. I decided to keep moving forward. The trail would reconnect with the fire road in a mile or two. I could make it. Just stay alert. That next stretch was the longest mile of my life. Every few minutes I stopped and scanned behind me, then above, then to the sides. I thought I saw movement twice. Once, just beyond a line of trees, a flicker of tan against the brown. The second time, higher up the slope, near a cluster of rocks. Could have been shadows, could have been nothing, but my body didn't believe that. At one point, I felt the hair on my neck stand up, full goosebumps, like something was watching me so closely I could feel its breath. I turned in slow circles, heart pounding, hand on the grip of my pistol. Nothing, just trees and rocks and silence. Then I heard it, not loud, not close, but definite. A low thump, the sound of weight landing on soft ground. I froze, didn't breathe. Every cell in my body screamed for me to run, but I stayed still. I turned slowly toward where the sound came from, and that's when I saw it. 20 yards upslope, standing on a boulder half hidden by branches, was the mountain lion. It was massive, bigger than I expected. Its body was long and low, its tail twitching slightly behind it. Muscles rippled under its tan coat as it shifted its weight, just staring at me. His eyes didn't blink. His head didn't move. It was just watching. I don't know how long we stood there. Could have been 10 seconds. Could have been 2 minutes. I didn't move. I didn't reach for the gun. I just kept my eyes on it. It didn't crouch. It didn't growl. It just stayed there, ears up, head high. Then, without a sound, it turned and stepped back into the trees. Gone. Just like that. No rustling. No noise. It vanished like smoke. I stood there for a long time after that. I didn't know whether to feel lucky or terrified. Probably both. I started walking again, but this time slower. Every step felt shaky. I kept my head on a swivel, expecting it to show up again. Didn't. I made it to the fire road by early evening. I didn't stop to eat or rest. I just walked the last few miles back to the truck, every sound behind me making me turn. I felt like I was being watched the entire time. When I reached the truck, I didn't even take off my pack. I just got in, locked the doors, and started driving. I pulled over 5 miles later to calm down and drink some water. My hands were still shaking. Back home, I told a few people what happened. Most of them just nodded and said I was lucky. They were right. But what stuck with me most wasn't the fear. It was that look, that quiet, calm look, like the lion was weighing its options. Like it was close, that close, to making a decision I wouldn't have seen coming. And then it didn't. I never go out without thinking about that now. I still hike, still solo, but I stay more alert. I listen harder. I study the ground. I watch the trees above me, because the truth is, the woods are beautiful, but they aren't tame. They never were. And if you ever see a mountain lion, remember, that's the best case. Because if it wants to get you, you won't see it at all. It gets brutally hot out here in the summer. Not humid, just dry and oppressive, like the sun is laying directly on your shoulders. But the nights are fine. Not cold, not hot. Just warm enough to wear a tee and maybe throw a thin hoodie in your pack in case the wind kicks up. That desert stillness rolls in just after sunset, and the whole place turns quiet in a way that almost buzzes in your ears. You don't hear cars, no wind through trees, just the occasional coyote yipping from somewhere far off and the crunch of gravel under your boots if you're moving. It's peaceful in its own way, but you have to respect it. We live in a part of Arizona most people fly over or drive through without stopping. It's all jagged ridges, mesquite, and rock-strewn washes. I've lived here my whole life, and I've seen every side of it, beautiful and brutal. When friends come visit, especially the ones from cities or green parts of the country, they think it's all dead land until we take them out past the lights and show them what the desert really looks like at night. That's the trick. Day hikes are one thing, but at night, the desert shows its real self. The world glows under moonlight, and all the stuff that hides during the heat crawls out to stretch. Scorpions are probably the main attraction for the uninitiated. People get freaked out, but they're not aggressive unless you mess with them. We carry UV flashlights and sweep them across the dirt and rocks, and when they light up like neon green glow sticks, it blows people's minds. It's like the ground comes alive. That summer night hike started the same as all the others. A couple of friends in from back east, a couple locals, a few headlamps, some water, a couple beers for after the walk, and UV lights in our pockets. It was around 8:30 p.m. when we left the trucks parked off a dirt road that dead-ended near an old dried-out riverbed. We told the newcomers what to expect. Bring water, watch your step, stay with the group, and if you see a glowing green thing skittering around, don't stomp it, just look. The hike itself wasn't difficult. Mostly flat, a few gradual dips through old washes and shallow ravines. We started walking west toward a low ridge that curved into a crescent. That's where we usually went. By the time we got there, the moon was high, and the air felt just about perfect. Warm enough that you didn't need sleeves, but cool enough that the sweat from earlier was long gone. We turned on the UV lights near a patch of gravel and scattered boulders that always seemed to attract the most activity. Like clockwork, the scorpions started glowing. Tiny ones, big ones, some just still and waiting in little rock crevices, others lumbering slowly across the open ground. The city friends were both fascinated and creeped out, which was the usual reaction. I had my phone out, snapping a few pictures, when I noticed something strange off to my right. At first, I thought it was just another scorpion. The UV light hit it and lit something up. But this glow wasn't the usual shade. It was deeper, almost bluish green, and way brighter. Too bright. It was coming from a narrow split in the rock about 20 feet away. It looked like something was glowing from inside the crack. I stepped away from the group, shining my light closer. The glow didn't flicker or move. It wasn't an animal. Not a scorpion or lizard or anything like that. It was just this steady blue-green light coming from deep in a narrow gap that ran between two slabs of sandstone. The space was maybe 8 inches wide at the top and disappeared into shadow about 3 feet down. I crouched next to it, trying to see further in. The light wasn't coming from the surface. It was deeper, maybe another couple feet down. I called one of the guys over and asked him to shine his UV in from a different angle, but the glow stayed the same. It didn't change with movement or light, just steady and bright. That was the first sign something wasn't right. I've spent enough time in the desert to know what's normal. Scorpions glow, sure, but they glow in patches and they move. This was different. This wasn't alive. It felt like something was inside the rock. We decided to keep walking. The night air was starting to shift. The wind came in low and cold, and the scorpions started disappearing back under rocks and brush. That happens when it gets closer to midnight. The world quiets again. It felt like time to head back. On the return trail, we didn't talk much. Everyone was a little tired, a little buzzed from adrenaline. The newcomers were still going on about the scorpions. I kept thinking about that light. I looked back once and saw the ridge in silhouette against the moon, the spot where the glowing crack had been just a dark notch in the slope. I figured I'd come back and check it out on my own later. That was the plan anyway. But that night, when I got home, I noticed something on my boot. Right near the ankle, pressed into the tread, was a small smudge of that same blue-green color. It wasn't paint. It wasn't a reflection. It glowed faintly even without the UV. Just a soft shimmer that faded the longer I stared at it. I scrubbed at it with a cloth, but it didn't come off. The next morning, it was gone. Over the next week, I went back out to the ridge twice. Same route, same spot, but the glowing crack was gone. No light, nothing in the rock. I brought tools the second time and tried digging a little into the gap, but it only went about 2 feet deep and ended in solid stone. I never told the other guys what I saw on my boot. Never showed them the pictures. It was probably some kind of mineral or bacteria reacting to the light. That's the most likely explanation. But even now, years later, I still think about it when I'm out at night. The desert has a way of hiding things in plain sight. It doesn't need to shout to be dangerous. Sometimes it just waits. You walk past the same ridge 100 times, and on the 101st, you see something you can't explain. That was the last time I went night hiking out there with a group. These days, if I go at all, I go alone. And I don't carry a UV light anymore. Some things are better left in the dark. It gets brutally hot out here in the summer. Not humid, just dry and oppressive, like the sun is laying directly on your shoulders. But the nights are fine. Not cold, not hot. Just warm enough to wear a tee and maybe throw a thin hoodie in your pack in case the wind kicks up. That desert stillness rolls in just after sunset, and the whole place turns quiet in a way that almost buzzes in your ears. You don't hear cars, no wind through trees, just the occasional coyote yipping from somewhere far off and the crunch of gravel under your boots if you're moving. It's peaceful in its own way, but you have to respect it. We live in a part of Arizona most people fly over or drive through without stopping. It's all jagged ridges, mesquite, and rock-strewn washes. I've lived here my whole life, and I've seen every side of it, beautiful and brutal. When friends come visit, especially the ones from cities or green parts of the country, they think it's all dead land until we take them out past the lights and show them what the desert really looks like at night. That's the trick. Day hikes are one thing, but at night, the desert shows its real self. The world glows under moonlight, and all the stuff that hides during the heat crawls out to stretch. Scorpions are probably the main attraction for the uninitiated. People get freaked out, but they're not aggressive unless you mess with them. We carry UV flashlights and sweep them across the dirt and rocks, and when they light up like neon green glow sticks, it blows people's minds. It's like the ground comes alive. That summer night hike started the same as all the others. A couple of friends in from back east, a couple locals, a few headlamps, some water, a couple beers for after the walk, and UV lights in our pockets. It was around 8:30 p.m. when we left the trucks parked off a dirt road that dead-ended near an old dried-out riverbed. We told the newcomers what to expect. Bring water, watch your step, stay with the group, and if you see a glowing green thing skittering around, don't stomp it, just look. The hike itself wasn't difficult. Mostly flat, a few gradual dips through old washes and shallow ravines. We started walking west toward a low ridge that curved into a crescent. That's where we usually went. By the time we got there, the moon was high, and the air felt just about perfect. Warm enough that you didn't need sleeves, but cool enough that the sweat from earlier was long gone. We turned on the UV lights near a patch of gravel and scattered boulders that always seemed to attract the most activity. Like clockwork, the scorpions started glowing. Tiny ones, big ones, some just still and waiting in little rock crevices, others lumbering slowly across the open ground. The city friends were both fascinated and creeped out, which was the usual reaction. I had my phone out, snapping a few pictures, when I noticed something strange off to my right. At first, I thought it was just another scorpion. The UV light hit it and lit something up. But this glow wasn't the usual shade. It was deeper, almost bluish green, and way brighter. Too bright. It was coming from a narrow split in the rock about 20 feet away. It looked like something was glowing from inside the crack. I stepped away from the group, shining my light closer. The glow didn't flicker or move. It wasn't an animal. Not a scorpion or lizard or anything like that. It was just this steady blue-green light coming from deep in a narrow gap that ran between two slabs of sandstone. The space was maybe 8 inches wide at the top and disappeared into shadow about 3 feet down. I crouched next to it, trying to see further in. The light wasn't coming from the surface. It was deeper, maybe another couple feet down. I called one of the guys over and asked him to shine his UV in from a different angle, but the glow stayed the same. It didn't change with movement or light, just steady and bright. That was the first sign something wasn't right. I've spent enough time in the desert to know what's normal. Scorpions glow, sure, but they glow in patches and they move. This was different. This wasn't alive. It felt like something was inside the rock. We decided to keep walking. The night air was starting to shift. The wind came in low and cold, and the scorpions started disappearing back under rocks and brush. That happens when it gets closer to midnight. The world quiets again. It felt like time to head back. On the return trail, we didn't talk much. Everyone was a little tired, a little buzzed from adrenaline. The newcomers were still going on about the scorpions. I kept thinking about that light. I looked back once and saw the ridge in silhouette against the moon, the spot where the glowing crack had been just a dark notch in the slope. I figured I'd come back and check it out on my own later. That was the plan anyway. But that night, When I got home, I noticed something on my boot. Right near the ankle, pressed into the tread, was a small smudge of that same blue-green color. It wasn't paint. It wasn't a reflection. It glowed faintly even without the UV. Just a soft shimmer that faded the longer I stared at it. I scrubbed at it with a cloth, but it didn't come off. The next morning, it was gone. Over the next week, I went back out to the ridge twice. Same route, same spot, but the glowing crack was gone. No light, nothing in the rock. I brought tools the second time and tried digging a little into the gap, but it only went about 2 feet deep and ended in solid stone. I never told the other guys what I saw on my boot. Never showed them the pictures. It was probably some kind of mineral or bacteria reacting to the light. That's the most likely explanation. But even now, years later, I still think about it when I'm out at night. The desert has a way of hiding things in plain sight. It doesn't need to shout to be dangerous. Sometimes it just waits. You walk past the same ridge 100 times, and on the 101st, you see something you can't explain. That was the last time I went night hiking out there with a group. These days, if I go at all, I go alone. And I don't carry a UV light anymore. Some things are better left in the dark. I'd flown into Oregon the week before, a last-minute solo trip. I just needed a break from screens, noise, people. The kind of break where everything around you shuts up and all you hear is your own footsteps and the breeze through the trees. I picked a less popular hiking route about 2 hours from Bend. Some trails don't even show up on big maps. This one didn't, but it was real. I found it mentioned in a small online forum about abandoned or lesser-used forest paths. The idea of hiking something quieter, maybe forgotten, appealed to me. I arrived late afternoon. The parking lot was gravel, partly overgrown. Only 2 cars sat in the lot. Both looked dusty and hadn't moved in a while. I took that as a good sign. Fewer people, more quiet. After lacing up my boots, checking my pack one more time, I grabbed my trekking poles and set off. The trail started off smooth. Slight incline, soft dirt, pine needles underfoot. About a mile in, the trees started thickening, and everything felt darker, cooler. Ferns brushed my legs. Moss hung from thick branches above. I kept moving. No cell signal, which I expected. I marked the time, 5:21 p.m. About an hour in, I passed an odd-looking tree. It was this bluish-gray thing, thick and gnarled. Its trunk was hollow at the base, a wide, open mouth of dark wood and shadow, the kind of tree that made you glance twice. I stopped to take a sip of water and leaned against a nearby log. My foot brushed something. I looked down. It was a dried-out husk of a wasp nest. The outer shell had peeled off, like it had been chewed away by weather or something worse. There was movement then, something deep inside the hollow trunk. I didn't see it clearly, just a shifting shape. I assumed it was a chipmunk or squirrel, nothing crazy. Still, I didn't linger. I shouldered my pack and kept walking. My plan was to set up camp before dark and finish the rest of the loop in the morning. By 7 o'clock, I'd made it to a clearing just off the trail. It was slightly uneven, but dry and far enough from any water sources to avoid mosquitoes. I dropped my pack and started unpacking tent, sleeping bag, food bag. The wind picked up slightly. The air had a damp smell, like a storm might be coming. I set up quickly, boiled some water for dehydrated rice and beans, and ate while watching the light fade. There was no sound except the trees creaking. No birds, no bugs. I zipped into my tent just as the last orange light disappeared from the sky. At some point in the night, I woke up sweating. My headlamp said 3:04 a.m. I'd zipped everything up tight before bed, but the air inside the tent was thick and humid. I opened the top vent flap and lay back, listening to nothing but my own breathing. No wind now, no rustling leaves, just stillness. Eventually, I drifted back off. I woke again right as the sky was starting to lighten. The cold hit me immediately. My sleeping bag was warm, but the air outside had dropped to maybe 40 degrees Fahrenheit. I pulled on a fleece, unzipped the tent, and stepped out. Mist hung low over the ground, curling between bushes and trees. I needed to take a dump, badly. That kind of pressure in your gut that won't wait. I walked maybe 100 yards off trail, found a decent spot behind some bushes, dug a quick cat hole, and squatted. I had my small roll of toilet paper with me, but after finishing up, I realized I'd forgotten my headlamp. The forest was still dark. Light hadn't made it past the treetops yet. I fumbled around for the roll, couldn't find it. I crouched, frustrated, waving my hand across the ground. Then, without warning, my hand grazed something that moved. I froze. Faint light was coming in now, just enough to see silhouettes. I squinted and leaned in closer to a bump just off to the side of my foot. It wasn't a rock. It was a spider, a massive one, bigger than my palm. Its legs were curled slightly, body round, shiny. A thick banana spider, the kind I'd only ever seen in documentaries or maybe online videos, hanging in webs the size of windows. This one wasn't in a web though. It was just sitting there, unmoving. I had no idea if it was alive or dead. Then it twitched. Every muscle in my legs locked up. My heart started beating hard. The roll of toilet paper lay right beside it, tucked half under a root, maybe a foot from the spider's legs. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't scared of bugs in general, but something about how huge this thing was and how still the forest felt made me feel like I was somewhere I shouldn't be, like I'd broken some rule. I reached slowly, just a few inches. The spider twitched again, fast, almost like it lunged forward half an inch. I yanked my hand back. My foot slid in the dirt, sent a rock tumbling downhill. The spider moved, not away, but straight under a nearby tree root. Fast. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. I didn't care about the toilet paper anymore. I ran. By the time I got back to my camp, my hands were shaking. I packed everything up fast. Tent, food, gear. I didn't care how neatly it went. I just needed to move. I skipped breakfast. By 6:15 a.m., I was already back on the trail, marching with more urgency than I liked to admit. Every sound made me flinch. A bird call, the rustle of leaves. My mind spun them into something bigger. I passed the hollow tree again around 7 o'clock. Something was different. The entrance was wider now, like something had shifted inside and bent the trunk. I didn't look in. I didn't stop. I walked faster. The trail seemed longer than I remembered. My legs burned. I kept thinking about how quiet everything was, like the forest had gone hollow. I got back to the trailhead around 8:30. The 2 cars were still there, same layer of dust. I tossed my pack in my trunk and drove straight out. Didn't stop until I hit pavement again. Didn't even look back in the rearview mirror. That night, I stayed in a cheap motel. Air conditioning, TV on low volume. I didn't sleep much. My brain kept looping the image of that spider, how fast it moved, how silent everything had gone when I saw it, how the tree trunk looked more like a cave than a tree. The next morning, I checked online for banana spiders in Oregon. Turns out they don't belong there. Not native, not supposed to be found anywhere near that region, and definitely not 5 inches across. I uploaded some trail photos to my laptop later that day. Most were boring. Trees, rocks, ferns. But one of them, one I didn't remember taking, was from the hollow tree. A shot from too close, taken from inside almost. It showed nothing specific, just the curving, damp walls of bark and moss. But in the bottom right corner, partly hidden in shadow, were 2 shiny black legs. I've hiked alone for most of my adult life. Something about being out there without anyone around gives me a kind of calm that nothing else ever has. I'm not a people person. Too much noise, too much pretending. But on the trail, it's just me, my gear, and whatever the wild decides to throw my way. This trip started the same way they always do. I spent the week packing, checking weather reports, loading my GPS maps, and double-checking gear. I picked a trail I hadn't done before. Somewhere in the Rockies, a few hours west of a small Colorado town. The trail was a 22-mile loop, mostly ridge hiking with a few steep drop-offs and rock scrambles along the way. The name of the trail isn't important. What matters is that it was remote. Barely any online reviews, no crowds, and a reputation for being quiet. I drove out early on a Thursday. I remember the cold air slipping in through the cracked windows of my truck as I made the final stretch down a dirt road. It had rained earlier in the week, so the path was a little slick, but nothing my tires couldn't handle. The trailhead was empty, just a single dirt parking area with one old metal sign that had been shot up with pellets and graffiti. I laced up, tossed my pack over my shoulders, locked up the truck, and set off just as the sun started to rise. The first 5 miles were beautiful. Thick pine trees, crisp mountain air, and that soft trail crunch underfoot. There was snow tucked in the shady spots and frost on some of the branches. I passed a frozen creek, climbed a steep series of switchbacks, and reached the first ridge around mid-morning. From there, the view opened up. You could see miles of jagged rock and deep forest in every direction. I felt small in the best possible way. The trail ran along the ridge, sometimes right at the edge of steep drop-offs. I stayed careful, planting each step solidly. Wind gusts came in hard sometimes, pushing up from the cliffs below. That was the first time I felt something off. Not fear exactly, just unease, like the kind that makes your skin feel one size too small. It didn't make sense. Everything around me looked normal. The trail, the trees, the weather, it was all fine. But my body was buzzing with something I couldn't name. I pushed it down and kept going. Around noon, I found a flat area tucked behind a windbreak of rock. I took my pack off, stretched out my legs, and sat down to eat a sandwich. As I chewed, I noticed a strange pattern in the trees across the ridge. It looked like something had gone through there recently. Branches were broken, bark was scraped. Pine needles had been churned up like someone or something had moved fast and rough through that stretch. It wasn't an animal path. I've seen plenty of elk and deer sign before, and this didn't match any of it. Still, I tried to brush it off. Fallen branch, wind damage, maybe snowmelt runoff. Could have been anything. I packed up and started walking again. The trail narrowed, becoming a thin strip carved out of a steep slope. To the left, it climbed into broken rocks and thick brush. To the right, it dropped off into a long, steep slope of loose stone. One wrong step and you'd slide hundreds of feet. I slowed down and stayed close to the wall. That's when I heard the sound. Sharp and short, like a rock cracking. I froze. Another snap, then silence. I turned around slowly, scanning the trail behind me. Empty. Nothing moved, but something felt close. Too close. I held my breath and waited, heart starting to thump harder in my chest. Nothing happened. No more sounds. Just that same silence that had been following me since I left the tree line. I moved again, faster now, legs tight, eyes flicking back every few steps. I must have covered 2 miles before I let myself stop again. By then, the sun was starting to drop lower in the sky. Shadows stretched across the trail. I found a flat spot tucked against a big rock wall and decided to make camp there. I needed rest. As I set up my tent, I realized I hadn't seen another person all day. Not even signs of someone else.
No boot prints, no liter, no distant voices.
The trail was supposed to be remote, but not this remote. Something about the silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. Felt like I was being watched. That night, I barely slept. Every small sound outside the tent made my body tense up. Branches cracking, the wind moving through brush, a soft thud somewhere behind the tent. I knew better than to open the flap and shine a light out into the dark. You never see anything, just shadows that make it worse. I lay there, staring at the ceiling of nylon, gripping my knife under the sleeping bag, heart pounding. The morning was colder than I expected. I woke up sore, tired, and still uneasy. I made instant coffee and a protein bar, packed up camp, and got moving early. I wanted to get out of that section of trail as fast as I could. I pushed harder than usual, barely stopping, eyes scanning the trees and rocks. I told myself I was being paranoid, sleep-deprived, imagining things. Then, around mid-morning, I found something that stopped me cold. On the side of the trail, a few feet into the brush, was a boot. Just one. It was sitting upright, like someone had stepped out of it. No blood, no drag marks, just a single boot, laces tied, a bit weather-worn but not old. I stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of it. I didn't want to step off the trail, but I had to get a closer look. I moved slowly, crouched next to it, and picked it up. It was damp on the inside, not soaked, just moist, like someone had worn it recently. I looked around, scanning for more. Another boot, gear, maybe a jacket. Nothing, just that one boot sitting there like a forgotten warning. I put it back down where I found it, stepped back onto the trail, and kept walking. But now my heart was going faster. I was sweating despite the cold air. Every nerve felt like it was on high alert. I was 10 miles in at that point. No way to go back without making a full loop, unless I wanted to bushwhack several miles through unknown terrain. I didn't. I stuck to the trail and kept moving. About a mile later, the trail dipped into a narrow ravine. The slope on both sides was steep, and the path was lined with tall grass and scattered rock. I started down it, keeping my steps even, watching the ground. That's when I saw movement up ahead. Not big, just a flicker, something ducking down into the grass on the left side of the ravine. I stopped and watched. Nothing moved again. I kept walking, slower now, trying to stay quiet. I got to the spot where I'd seen the movement and scanned the area. The grass was flattened in one spot, like someone had crouched there recently. Still warm. The dirt looked pressed down, but there were no prints, just that trampled grass. I kept going. The next 2 hours were some of the most tense I've ever had on a trail. I stopped checking my GPS. I just wanted out. I didn't eat lunch, didn't stop to drink unless I had to. Every time I passed a bend, I expected something to be there, blocking the trail, crouching in the brush, waiting in the trees. I didn't know what. I didn't want to know. Around mile 17, the trail climbed steeply again. Sharp switchbacks led up to another ridgeline. I was sweating hard, breathing rough, legs aching. I kept telling myself I was almost out, that the truck was just a few hours away. But I didn't believe it. Time felt weird, stretched out, like the trail was looping back on itself. Then, at the top of the ridge, I stopped dead. There, hanging from a low tree branch, was a piece of blue nylon. It looked like part of a jacket, torn, frayed, fluttering in the wind. I walked closer. It was a sleeve, still had part of the cuff attached. A bit of dried blood on the fabric. Not a lot, just enough to make my stomach drop. I looked around. The trail was bare. No tracks, no gear, no signs of a struggle. Just that single sleeve, caught in the tree like a forgotten flag. I didn't touch it. I didn't want my prints on it. I just stood there for a second, heart hammering, and then I turned and kept walking. The last few miles were a blur. I remember the sound of my own boots, the wind, my own pulse in my ears. I remember the light fading fast, even though it wasn't late. I remember seeing the outline of the parking lot through the trees and almost not believing it. When I stepped out of the woods and onto the gravel, I nearly collapsed. My truck was still there. No one else around. Same empty lot. I fumbled the keys out of my pack, unlocked the door, and got in. I locked the doors, sat there shaking, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for miles. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, staring at the trailhead, trying to understand what the hell had happened out there. I didn't call the police. I didn't report the boot or the jacket sleeve. I should have. I know that, but something deep in me said not to. I don't know if it was fear or shame or just plain survival instinct. I just drove, for hours back to the nearest town. Got a room,